Hello, and thank you for joining me during the Volo Foundation's Florida Climate Week. My name is Dr. Megan Ennis, and I am the Assistant Curator of Education in the Department of Natural History and the Director of the Thompson Earth Systems Institute at the University of Florida. Today I'm going to share with you research-based strategies for having more effective conversations about climate change. The mission of the Thompson Earth Systems Institute is to advance communication and education about Earth systems science in a way that inspires Floridians to be effective stewards of our planet. As the director of TESI and a faculty member at UF, one of my areas of research is related to how we talk about climate change in ways that help people to feel a sense of hope and a sense of agency that we can make changes to address climate change. I have been working in climate change communications since 2011 as part of the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation. NOCI is a network of individuals and organizations in formal and informal education, the social sciences, climate sciences, and public policy. We are currently working in more than 184 institutions in 38 states. We share a commitment to using evidence-based communication methods and providing the social and emotional support needed to engage as climate communicators. By working together, we develop the knowledge, techniques, community, and confidence needed to empower our audience to act on climate change. And by speaking about climate change consistently across the country, we are changing public discourse to be positive, civic-minded, and solutions-focused. Today's presentation is grounded in the research conducted by NOCI to improve climate change communication. Research on behavior change indicates that knowing something doesn't automatically lead to behavior change. Emotions often play a very large mediating role. So how do we address this when we are talking about climate change? One way to do that is through the use of framing. When we talk to people, we are not trying to fill an empty head with knowledge. People are not blank slates, but rather come with ideas about how the world works. Framing allows you to engage your listener regardless of their worldview by connecting to a value they hold and contextualizing the information you are sharing in ways that are easily understandable. And when we're talking about climate change, it is very important that we avoid crisis messaging. We want to help people understand climate change and its impact so that we can all get on the same page and work together, but we don't want to have people feel that there's no way to address this. So as you're developing your conversations about climate change, you want to make sure that you include three major parts. Why does it matter? How does it work, and what can we do about it? Whenever we talk about oceans and climate change, we need to include these three pieces to leave people feeling a sense of hope, efficacy, and agency to take action related to climate change. There are specific steps used to effectively frame your climate change conversations, and these steps are based on research conducted by the Frameworks Institute with over 5,000 Americans. First, you must begin with a value. Tell your listeners why they should care about what you have to say. Next, make sure you connect your value to a solution through an explanatory chain. You cannot assume your audience knows what you are talking about, so you must walk them through step by step. When communicating your information, make sure to use easily understandable metaphors that help your listeners understand what you're trying to say. The metaphors shared in this webinar have all been tested through research. Finally, finish your talk with concrete actions you want your listeners to take. As a trusted source of information, your listeners want you to tell them what they can do to address the issue. This leaves them feeling hopeful rather than anxious and trying to figure out what actions they can take that will have a meaningful impact. And what's very exciting is this will also help you to feel more hopeful and that there is opportunities for us all to make change. If you want to read more about these steps in action, I have a link to our peer-reviewed publication in this tiny URL, and it should also be connected in the conference app. When framing an issue, it is important to first connect your audience to the subject with a value. Values are ideas that are held to be true across individuals and are influenced by culture. Values are a broad category of cherished ideals. That is, we're not talking about just religious values or moral values. These include civic values and, more generally, things that we believe as a culture are ideals to live up to. Values can include concepts like pragmatism. If we have a problem and know the solution, we should fix it. This isn't a value that you would necessarily find in a sacred text, but it is a very strongly held American value. By engaging your listeners with a value, you are telling them why they should care about what you're about to tell them. If you don't start with a value and connect to your listener, you've already lost them and your message will be less effective. And there are many values that have been tested through research. Our group conducted research with nearly 5,000 Americans to determine which values help orient the public to thinking about climate change in more productive ways. The participants were asked their opinion on a number of measures both before and after exposure to the value. And of the values listed here on the slide that were tested, the two that tested the highest with the North American public are protection and responsible management. Protection is the value that tested the best at getting the most people oriented and supportive of climate action. This value emphasizes the need to shield people from harm or stepping in to ensure people's safety. It also underlines the importance of risk reduction, concern for the welfare of others, and preserving habitats. The other value that resonated with the public is responsible management. This value stresses the importance of using common sense and step-by-step approaches to come up with responsible, long-term plans that act in the interest of future generations as well as today. Additional values that were also tested but weren't quite as effective were the ideas of innovation, or our ability to work together to solve problems, stewardship, or our responsibility to care for the environment, which is similar to protection and responsible management, interconnectedness, or showing how we are all connected and interdependent on the planet, and legacy, or wanting to leave the better planet for future generations. I recently conducted new research on how to use framing to talk about climate change issues in wetlands, and we found protection and responsible management, along with stewardship, resonated strongly with Floridians as we think about how to protect the Everglades from climate change impacts. That research should be published soon if you want to reach out to me for more information on that particular study. So if we're looking at our value of protection, this is a value that tested the best at getting the most people oriented and supportive of climate change. And this value emphasizes the need to shield people from harm and emphasizes the importance of risk reduction, concern for the welfare of others, and preserving habitats. So it focuses on our responsibility to minimize human impacts. And it also focuses on the preservation of habitats and ecosystems, not for our sake, but for their own sake. And also because we depend on them. The other value that resonated is responsible management. So again, using step-by-step strategies to come up with responsible long-term plans for future generations. And this focuses on our duty to preserve and protect nature, but by giving very specific ways. And this not only helps us think about our responsibility for tomorrow, but also taking responsibility for today. And there's no rule of thumb for whether you should use protection or responsible management. You can use both, but you want to make sure you clearly convey both ideas instead of blending them halfway. Some values work better for some topics, and some people are more comfortable with one or the other, and you can't go wrong with either one. So again, practice with these until you feel natural including them in your communications. So here are two very short examples of how you might use a value in your discussion about habitats in Florida or issues related to water and climate change. So we can protect the habitats and ecosystems we as Floridians depend on by addressing the issues of climate change today. Or We have a responsibility to appropriately manage our water usage to protect our ecosystems for today and future generations. To select the appropriate value, it is important to know your audience. For example, are you talking to the public or members of your field? Is your audience made up of native English speakers or are they multilingual? Do they have different political backgrounds? This is just a short list of various audiences you might run into. Each of these audiences may have specific values that appeal to them more strongly than others, and understanding what those are will make your conversation stronger. So by thinking critically about who you're intending to talk to, you can better select the appropriate value to begin with. Once you have your value, we move into explanation. Most people you talk with will not be experts in climate change, so using an explanatory chain helps your listeners connect the dots between your value and the action you want them to take. You will walk them through the information from A to B to C without skipping any steps. It is often easy for us to see how A connects to D, but not all audiences will. So make sure you connect the dots, and it doesn't hurt to use more logical steps than you think is necessary. Even so, we are often talking about complex ideas, so it is helpful to use a metaphor to make this easier to understand. Frameworks tested a series of metaphors that are proven to succinctly fill the gaps between public and scientific understanding, to structure current and future thinking on the topic, and to motivate productive solutions conversations. Each of these metaphors helps explain an aspect of the climate change story in ways that people can relate to. These metaphors can encourage conversations, drawing audiences into discussions on potential solutions. An explanatory metaphor is a simple, concrete, and memorable comparison that quickly and effectively explains an abstract or complex topic. Explanatory metaphors developed by frameworks have been tested extensively to ensure that they build public understanding about how a problem, process, or issue works, and that they reliably lead to stronger support for research-based policy positions. One example of a metaphor is the heat-trapping blanket, and this can be used in the following way. As we burn fossil fuels in cars and factories, we release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which then acts as a heat-trapping blanket that disrupts the climate. There are other metaphors available from Noki, and I will share with you some of those on the next slide, and also they're on our website that I'll share with you at the end of the presentation. Other metaphors include regular versus rampant carbon dioxide, osteoporosis of the sea, and climate's heart. These can be used to discuss other issues related to climate change. Additionally, my research team identified new metaphors for talking about climate change and wetlands in the Florida Everglades, and those results should be available soon, so let me know if you'd like a copy of our manuscript once it's published. When framing your message, you have to make sure you finish strong. Give your listeners concrete actions that they can take that will make meaningful change. This leaves them feeling hopeful that the issue can be resolved rather than resigned that it is too late to take action. Do not assume that your listeners know what these actions may be. Lay out a variety of options that include collective actions. For climate change, we are at the point where we need to be addressing this collectively rather than through individual actions such as changing a light bulb. And please know that a community doesn't just mean our neighborhoods or towns. Communities can come in many different forms, such as schools, Facebook, book clubs, places of worship, your friends. By keeping this in mind, we can broaden our ability to look for good solutions with which many different people are engaged that make sense for their area. When we include community level people, that concern for our climate is normal, and action related to climate change is happening all around us. We can come together as community members to address climate change and help change the decision-making context so that the sustainable choice is the easy choice for more Americans. We can foster engagement and hope by framing climate change as a problem that can be addressed as a collective level through practical steps by an informed, engaged community. The solutions element helps us to move past the media gridlock where no one does anything and instead highlights the idea that action is happening all around us and it is normal to take part in it. Research tells us that a majority of Americans are concerned about climate change, but they are self-silencing because they're convinced they have the minority opinion. They're also nervous about talking about climate change because they're not confident they can talk about it correctly. So if we can empower the majority of Americans who are already concerned about climate change to start talking with their friends and families, we can start to turn the tide on this misconception and really start mobilizing for change. By focusing on collective solutions, we avoid the "what can I really do" or the drop in the bucket ideas that lead people right back to ignoring the problem because they feel overwhelmed. It is important that the scale and scope of the problem match the scale and scope of the solution. In this case, we're talking societal, so we need a collective response. By focusing on local solutions, things happening at the town, city, or state level, you can really help folks to feel connected and know that they can take part because these things are already happening. Highlighting actions that are happening now or could happen, again, give people a sense of agency and a sense that this is a problem today to be solved today and not some other day down the line. So just to summarize the pieces of framing you want to use in your climate change communication, we always want to start with, why does this matter to society? So selecting either responsible management or protection as a value to begin your conversation. Next, we want to talk about, how does this work? So making sure we're using an explanatory chain to clearly explain how driving your car drives climate change. Not all folks may understand those connections, so making sure you have enough information that they can follow along with you is very important. Otherwise, they may end up at some sort of realization that you're not trying to convey. And as you're using those explanatory chains, make sure you use an explanatory metaphor that helps them to better understand what it is that you are talking about. And finally, we want to finish with hope and making sure that we include some sort of community solution so that we can think about how to really make change as it relates to climate change. And this piece, as I said, is not just important for your listeners, it is important for you. Our research on museum educators who have used these strategies found that ending with solutions and actions not only help the audience to feel more agency, but really made the educators feel more hopeful as well. And that is so important when we're talking about an issue as large as climate change. And as you're going through these processes, do remember to avoid crisis messaging. We want our listeners to leave understanding that there are solutions and actions that we can take together to make effective change. And to take you back to that model of behavior change, here are how all three of those pieces can impact this behavior change model. All of them are important to work together to lead to the changes we want to see. So again, having our values, which helps us to connect to environmental emotions, such as connectedness to nature, concern about the planet, commitment to nature. Our explanatory chains and metaphors can really help improve the knowledge that folks have about climate change. And then offering these community level actions can then lead to behavior change because they know what actions they can take and that they are taking place already. So they're becoming part of a movement and not trying to make the move by themselves. And finally, I have one very important action for you to take. New research from Yale and across the world shows that people want to talk about climate change and that this individual action can lead to increased hope and a sense of agency that we can work together to make change. Using the strategies I've shared with you today can help you to have more effective conversations about climate change with any audience. So the more we talk about it, the more people will talk about it, and then hopefully we will see a greater acceptance of climate change science and the policies and practices we need to take to make change. For more information and to see the research behind the framing strategies we discussed today, please visit the NOKI website. I'm including all of their contact information here. And if you want to get all of the Florida-centered information related to climate change and the environment, please consider following us at the Thompson Earth Systems Institute. I'm including our website, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and also consider signing up for our Earth to Florida news bulletin. Each month, a student-led team at the Thompson Earth Systems Institute curates Florida's environmental news and explains what's going on, why it matters, and what we can do about it. Thank you so much for your time today. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, and thank you for joining us for this year's Florida Climate Week.